Good evening, everybody. How y'all doing? All right. Well, hey, we appreciate those of you who came out tonight and those of you joining us from home on Facebook Live. We appreciate you um, taking the evening to join us. We'll give everybody plenty enough time to get logged on and join us, because we hope you all enjoyed and were informed at last week's. Because I think tonight is the beginning of really good getting into some heavy stuff. Yeah, that's one way to put it, some heavy stuff. Tonight we are really going to embark into the, in some cases, the confusing stuff, the enlightening stuff, even controversial, differing of opinions. This is... We'll get into individuals and how they differ on certain doctrines and opinions. I want everybody to know we welcome your viewpoint. That does not mean I agree with it. Doesn't mean you'll convince me of changing my mind. But we always welcome the viewpoint and to hear what you have to say about anything that we will be discussing here. So hopefully, if we have any questions that pop up online, Junior, I'll look for you to wave me down and let me know. So good evening. We wanted to give everybody plenty enough time to get logged on and to get in. So we're going to cover, again, we're continuing on through the course of the remainder of this year, or however long we end up taking it, Bible prophecy and how it relates to current events. If you joined us last week or you remember the study, we kind of went backwards a little bit before we started advancing forward. And in doing so, we kind of talked about prophecy from the Old Testament that has already come to pass and has already come to fruition. We really went into the dream from King Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel and Daniel's interpretation, and how Daniel literally interpreted human history all the way right up to what we're getting ready to view and see today in our lifetime. What an incredible viewpoint and experience that Daniel got to have and to share it with all mankind, and that would usher in the birth of the nation of Israel, and also how many times that the prophecy of the coming Messiah, we see it fulfilled in Jesus at the turn of time. When you go from BC to AD, you see that Jesus starts time all over again. And here we are 2,000 years after that. And that's what's very interesting about time and how God operates, is that he has his own timeline. It's not about us. It's not about what's convenient for us. He has a plan in place. He knows what dominoes have to fall to get to the end result. You're not going to rush it, and you're not going to prevent it. So the way he operates, the way he's going to do things, you're not going to stop. You're not going to stop it. You're not going to prevent it. So tonight, if you want to, you can join us. We will be in Matthew chapter 24. That is going to be our focus. Tonight's going to start part 2, or subject number 2 of our series, and this is going at minimum going to take 2 weeks. So this is kind of going to be where we're going to plant roots for a couple weeks here, and we want to talk about following the signs. Following the signs. We're going to break this down into 2 parts this week and next week, and if we need to carry over a little bit to cover everything, we will. First of all, we want to share with you what are some of the signs that we will see in the world as preparation for the return of Christ, and then what are things that you're going to see in the church as evidence of his return. Because the Bible has prepared us for both of them, to see what's happening in the world and to see what's happening in the church. So tonight we're going to start off with follow the signs, and we're going to focus on what we're going to see in the world. You've probably heard a lot of these scriptures. We're going to try to just dive into them, and we want to kind of cover what Jesus is doing to prepare the church and also prepare his people. So there's a couple things I want to go over and start off with. Chapter 24, Matthew chapter 24, we're basically going to cover the entire chapter. So we're going to break it down in sections and cover the entire chapter. Verses 1, 2, and 3 is where I want to start, and then I'm going to lay down some groundwork, and then we're going to go verse by verse and piece by piece. Verses 1 through 3, chapter 24 of the book of Matthew. Jesus went out, departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said, "See ye not all these things? Verily I say to you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." Remember, they're looking at the temple. This is the center of their world. I want you to remember something very important we said last week. When God reveals prophecy, when Jesus revealed prophecy, they do it with his people at the center, not America. This is about Jerusalem. This is about the Hebrew. This is about the Israelite. This is about God's people, not about us. We got to get out of looking at prophecy through American eyes, through the English Western world. This is going to be, you got to look at it as if you're a Jew. They were worried about the temple, and Jesus is basically telling them there's going to be a destruction of this temple. I'm sure he alarmed them because when he sat upon, in verse 3, sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples then wanted to talk to him privately. And they asked him, "Tell us, when will these things be? What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the world?" So this is completely and fully, first of all, prophecy. We have to look at it through the eyes of the Hebrew, of the children of Israel, and how it affects. Because Jesus is telling them about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And when we get to the end of all this, we're going to see that's exactly where he establishes the capital of his kingdom. So sometimes when it comes to God, before he can establish what he wants, he tears down what is existing. All right?
Just like our lives.
Just like our lives. It's a great parallel. You're exactly right. So we're going to break down chapter 24 in answering his question to the disciples. What is the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? And Jesus answers both these questions in greater detail than I believe they were expecting. So I want you to write this down, because this is where we're going to break it down into 3 sections, and then we'll take it piece by piece. All right? Verses 4 through 14. Verses 4 through 14 is a description of the signs of the condition of the world prior to the rapture. Verses 4 through 14 are signs and descriptions of the condition of the world prior to the rapture. Verses 15 through 28 is after the rapture happens, the establishment of the Antichrist, the one world government, and the tribulation period. That's verses 15 through 28. After the rapture, the great tribulation, the rise of the Antichrist, the rise of the one world government, and verses 29 through 35 is the second coming of Jesus Christ. Which means we have to understand the understanding, we have to establish the understanding that the coming of Christ is technically twofold, although the rapture is not his second coming. We want you to understand that. When we refer to the second coming of Christ, we are referring to him coming and establishing his kingdom, the millennial rule, the millennial reign. 29 through 35 is the second coming and the establishing of his kingdom. So when we have these terms that we sometimes use interchangeably, we have terms that we can, when we preach, it's very easy, or we teach, it's very easy to say, get ready for Jesus is coming soon, and that is true, but it's really in two parts. It's the taking away of the church, where the church can see the sun, the S-O-N in the sky, and that's how I want you. It's twofold. You have the rapture, the catching away, the taking of the church, where the church sees the Son of God in the sky and goes to him. And then you have the second coming, where the world sees the Son of God coming to them. All right? So you got to think of it in two ways. The rapture, the catching away, is when the church sees Jesus and goes to him. The second coming is when the world sees Jesus coming to them. All right? So this is where we're going to break things down in these three sections. We're going to cover, first and foremost, verses 4 through 8. And verses 4 through 8, this is kind of where I want you to view, these are the birthing pains in preparation of Jesus coming back. This is where you have reached the near full term and you're getting ready for birth. And those of you that are here that have bared children, and husbands that have witnessed their spouses bear children, you know that that final month is a lot of discomfort, sometimes a lot of pain, and then leading right up to the birth is where the pain of the body is reached a pinnacle before the birth is given. So I want you to view verses 4 through 8. These are the birthing pains. These are verses that describe 4 major events that are taking place all over the world. Those 4 major events are false Christs, wars, famines, and earthquakes. You can find parallel scriptures in Mark 13, Luke 21, and Revelation chapter 6. Luke 21 even includes plagues in addition. Revelation 6 also includes economic distresses in its description. I want you to understand that these birth pains or these global events are not just occurring in one location. They're occurring in all sectors of the world, various places. We'll read the verse, you'll be hearing of wars and rumors of wars, not necessarily in your backyard, but other parts of the earth. Various places will have famines, earthquakes. You'll be hearing and you'll be seeing and you'll be witnessing. I want you to understand the unique timing of God, that Jesus said, you will hear of rumors of wars. You will see earthquakes. I like something that, tell them about this, the quote you said about signs.
If you notice, the disciples asked, what will be the sign? Jesus is telling them there's signs in the plural. They thought there was only going to be one. But there's many. So Jesus pretty much, and he comes right out of the chute. He don't pull no punches either. But
exactly.
There's going to be signs, plural.
I want you to understand, in order for this fulfillment of prophecy, for us to see these signs, it's an impossibility that these things could have happened 2,000 years ago. As a matter of fact, it's an impossibility that these things could have happened 100 years ago. And the reason being is because of technology. Technology has literally allowed you to hear and see things that are happening on the other side of the globe that don't necessarily affect you yet. I want you to understand that these birth pains are like a mother that is going to go into labor. So the very moment leading up to the catching away of the church is going to hurt. Okay? These days, these birthing pains are not necessarily the days of the Lord's wrath yet.
Oh, no.
That's going to be reserved for the Great Tribulation. We also want you to understand and to see that that these birth pains, these troubles that are happening here from verses 4 through 8 are things that have to take place, but not, they're going to take place for a period of time before the end actually happens. So it's going to require patience. That's why the church has been preaching for how many years? Because we see these things, but they have to happen in order to usher in the end. Jesus instructs us. I want you to know that he tells us that even though we see these things, he told us not to be afraid. He told Isaiah, "Do not fear, for I am with you." This is his promise to us. We also want you to know and we want you to be very clear in understanding that there's going to be a lot of death associated with these timelines. It's not going to be pretty. So let's go ahead and let's tackle these verse by verse, beginning at verse number 4. So I'm going to turn that over to Sim here, and we're going to take this verse by verse from verses 4 through 14.
All right, verse 4. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. Now that take heed, you could also, it means beware or be on guard. Because, you're supposed to guard your soul, but you need to be on guard to notice all these signs. And the word for deceive also means to seduce. Now, how many of you know that you can talk physically, but a person can seduce the way you think just by words? You can see that with the false teachers and preachers. They may give you a little sugar of the gospel, but then they're going to put in their stuff to seduce you and deceive you. And that's what he's talking. He's saying, beware. Me and my daughter and wife, we had a game when she was young. We'd be on a trip. We'd call it the alphabet game. And we would go from A to Z, and you'd try to find it on road signs, on cars, or whatever else. And my daughter would always say, keep your eyes peeled. And that's pretty much what this is saying right there. Keep your eyes peeled. Because he says, I'm giving you secrets of what's going to happen. So keep your eyes peeled on that. You have anything to add? All right, in verse 5, it says, For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive, seduce many. Now, I looked up. I know there's been a lot of people claiming to be Christ. I looked up. In the 1900s, does anybody want to take a guess how many people said they were Christ in the 1900s?
That's from 1900 to 1999.
How many? How many, Barry? How many do you think?
Verifiable.
What'd you say?
What'd you say?
31.
31.
No, it was 31 people claimed. Now, in the 2000s, there's been 7 people. And I know about 6 months ago, I watched a video of some group that this Korean guy said he was, and they're still following him. He died like 20 years ago, but they still think he's Jesus come back. That's one thing. Jesus tells you to study, to show yourself approved. And that's the main 2 things that the church does not have today, is studying the Word, reading the Word, and prayer. Because when you pray, God's going to talk to you. And so if you stay in the Word, like anything he says, anything I say, you all need to go home and check it in the Word. Everything, to make sure it correlates with the Word. And that's the way you should do any preacher. We're not above whatever. We need to stick to the Word, and you all need to make sure that we're doing that. Because if I stray from something and I tell you something, you either need to tell him to get me out of here or just leave. Because you always got to stay with the Word. The Word is the final answer. There was that game show, is that your final answer? The Word's the final answer. Now, verse 6, you shall hear wars and rumors of wars. See that you not be troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Now, I looked up. There's 10 official wars and 8 active military conflicts recognized by the United States going on right now. There's also other violent conflicts involving 64 countries and 576 militias and separatist groups. And that's not including the war in America and the war of evil against good in America and in the world. And that's the biggest war there is. So that's 18. And there's 64 countries. What is there, 120 some countries in the world? Yeah, that's, yeah, one of you guys. Yeah. Yeah, well, he starts out, the first thing he says, watch out for the deceivers and the seducers. And then you add in how many people, he's kind of giving you the timeline. That is right now, I mean, I don't think there's been that many wars and nation against nation. I couldn't tell you when. Probably since the Roman Empire.
Yeah, so if you look, again, we got to look through the eyes of the Jew.
Yeah.
And how this is being spoken to them. So that's a great question, how many wars? So if you look at Daniel's prophecy and you see the transference of kingdom from kingdom, when Jesus was born and going into, 0 AD, Anno Domini, to 33 after BC, that was literally the handoff from the Grecian Empire to the Roman Empire. So Jesus was being entered and ushered into a time frame where the Romans were coming to the height of their power, and they would be for quite a few years even after his death and resurrection. So in their perspective of world events, they were captured. They were basically absorbed by the Roman Empire. At the turn of the century, right before Jesus was born, the Roman Empire had eliminated the Grecian Empire just before his birth, which also meant taking over northern Africa. So their expansion was at its height. So for them, there were constant conflicts, but their perspective was only that of Roman Empire conquer. They had no other knowledge or vision, or they didn't see or have any other ideas of only but what the Roman Empire was accomplishing and conquering at that time. And when Jesus was speaking these words, I could be wrong, I'd have to go back and look, but I think when Jesus is speaking these words, Rome had conquered everything by that time. I don't think there was really very much after.
Well, they went to Germany. They went to the Rhine River. They had a little difficulty getting across the Rhine River and into Russia and that stuff.
Yeah, that's going. But Paul's journeys took him to
Spain,
Asia Minor,
yeah.
and so they had very limited. Obviously, Jesus was gone as Paul journeyed several years after that. So their knowledge of military conflict was basically confined to what the Roman Empire was doing. And Jesus' description here is he is saying there are wars and rumors of wars, but be not troubled. So go ahead. I'm jumping to verse 7, because then he goes even further. Now he's talking into things that the disciples had not yet witnessed.
Verse 7.
Nation against nation.
Nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in many places.
So we can tell you from their perspective, there weren't a whole lot of nations, to their knowledge. There weren't a whole lot of kingdoms outside the Roman Empire. There was always going to be famines, pestilences, but how many earthquakes really existed then?
Yeah.
So to ask, from their perspective, you almost have to act like, what if you didn't know anything that went on outside of the state of Ohio? I know that's a very poor example, but that's kind of where their perspective. What if you had no social media, you had no news, there was no phone, there is no newspaper, There are no magazines, and the only way you find out about anything is if whoever controlled your municipality told you and who you heard from the people you live next to, or if you journeyed to that place. So go right ahead, because I know you got it.
I looked up, and there's 4 famines in the world right now. And, not just one, but 4. Disease, COVID, there's all kinds, SARS, all that. And pestilences, you could look at the insects. The last year, 2 year, the grasshoppers and the locusts have been coming from like India all the way over to Africa, eating up crops and destroying, which is what's going to cause the famines. And earthquakes, large earthquakes greater than 8.0 in magnitude have struck the earth at a record high since, Barry, you mind showing this to people? Yeah, I made a graph. It's little, wouldn't enlarge. But since 2004, magnitude 6.0 to 8.0 earthquakes have exponentially gotten more. You'll see on that graph at 2000, it's, a little bit, and then it shoots up to almost like 3 times as many.
Sim, when would you say they actually started accurately tracking earthquake data? We know at least, 1850?
Yeah. I would say around then. I've got this book. It's probably from the late 70s, early 80s, from a preacher named Sam Luke, who came to our Church of God. It said, and this was back then, in the last few years, there has been a striking acceleration in the number of earthquakes. Statistics derived from the World Almanac reveal that there are only 6 earthquakes of strength between 1800 and 1896. But in each decade from 1897 until 1946, there were either 2 or 3 in the decade. From 47 to 1946, there were 7. And from 57 to 66, there was no less than 17. You can see how the earth, as he said, in the labor pains, it's getting more and more. Not only has the number of earthquakes increased, but the earthquakes are occurring in many different places. There's some of us old here. How many of you remember the earthquake in 1980 that was centered in Kentucky, but we felt it here?
That was 5 years before I was born, so I have to say no.
I was at a friend's house. We were playing cards, and his mom was there. All of a sudden, I start shaking, and I was going, "What's that?" And it was an earthquake. And I think there's been 1 or 2 more in Kentucky, and there's been some in Tennessee in the last year or 2. And those were places, usually in America, it was California. California was the place you ought to be, for earthquakes. But now, it's like it's going to every state. There's no state protected. And so it's just like he said, the earth is in labor pains, and God's causing it, and he's ready to, pop the baby out and start the new world. Yeah. It's like we said last week. Show me one instance where God ever lied. I told the pastor a few weeks ago, I heard a man speak about 2 months ago on the radio. Jesus fulfilled between 300 and 400 prophecies. The odds of one person fulfilling all of those prophecies is 34, put 100 zeros behind it. That pretty much means impossible. But what's impossible with man is not impossible with God.
That's why I said in a sermon several weeks ago that I do believe in climate change, but not for the reason that liberal minds want to profess. The climate is changing. The earth is changing. And it's changing because we're in that 9th month going into labor for the birth of Jesus taking his church home. We're there. And so as we see it intensify, the labor pains will increase, and the pain will reach a pinnacle right before the great event and great happening. So go right ahead.
Jason had put on here about the typhoons. Remember the one that hit Malaysia
Yes.
and wiped
Yes,
out
you're
most
right.
of that? See, an earthquake on one side of the world or a volcano can cause devastation on the other side. That's what tsunamis and these typhoons. You'll see an earthquake somewhere, and it causes the waves, and it comes faster and faster, and what's ever in its way is just destroyed.
Pay attention to world events or cataclysmic events or weather events where people tell you, the experts tell you, that this is something that's A, never happened before, or the likelihood of it ever happening was very slim to none. If you just go back the past 10 years and find those two instances, they've happened nonstop. And this year has been a year of several of those instances in a weather formation, is that there are things that are literally happening that have not happened before in our history, and they're happening right now. That is not a mystery as to why.
Well, just the storms. They've had to start over the alphabet again because there's been so many. I don't ever remember them having to start over an alphabet before. Yeah.
They said that over the past 20 years, the devastation has already been doubled in just the past 20 years, and it's caused $3 trillion in damage.
That's actually a good point. Those that are watching that didn't hear that, Brother Alan Stuckey just brought up that he brought a great point that the cost of devastation from storms over the past, 10 years? 20 years. The cost of rebuilding from this devastation of storms over the past 20 years has been in the trillions, which is unheard of. I mean, the evidence is right here. So,
Yeah.
So go right ahead. Let's go to the next one.
All right. In verse 8, it said, "These are the beginning of sorrows." I like the one translation that says, "These are the first of the sorrows." It's going to come in stages.
Yep.
Now, in verse 9, it says, "Then they shall deliver you up." Did you want to say anything?
No, I'll follow.
"They shall deliver you up to be afflicted, persecuted, and they shall kill you." It's happening in almost every country except ours. And like he said, we look through it in American eyes. God's not going to let us not have that happen to us.
No. I want to bring a couple of things to your attention from verse number 9. And this has been a difference of opinion among churchgoers and different factions of churches and what have you. The tribulation that is being described beginning here in verse number 9, if you look into the Greek words that are used, it's the Greek word thipsis, which means a time of pressure, distress, or persecution. So this is not the time of great tribulation, but this is a time of distress, pressure, or persecution on the believer leading up to the rapture of the church. So I want you to to know that what we need to do as a church, and this is getting into not just the biblical events, but what we need to understand as a church and as a Christian is that we need to begin to prepare our hearts and our minds to endure some level of persecution, because that is biblical. Now, this prophecy is given and should be seen through the lens of the Jewish believer, but I did read an article this week where the Chinese government is forcing the removal of Christian emblems.
Yeah. Destroying churches also.
Removing the churches, destroying the building, removing crosses, removing crucifixion, removing paintings, removing anything that is
And children too.
So we've got it easy, folks. You've got to see what's going on across the world and how it's affecting. This is happening before our very eyes. We have to prepare ourselves that things are just not going to be smooth and okay, and then one day we're going to hear the trumpet sound. We need to begin preparing ourselves that we will have to fight a spiritual fight, not just against the devil for your own personal benefit, but we're going to have to stand for our rights. We're already beginning to see it called into question. We're very fortunate to live in a country that's given us religious rights, and we're being protected by amendments. But all it takes is for the wrong person and the wrong group, and they can amend amendments to remove those freedoms from you. And when that day comes, don't let it catch you unaware, because Jesus is telling us you will be going through tribulation right before he takes the church. A time of pressure, a time of distress, and a time of persecution.
Especially when they tell you they're going to do it. Don't be
Especially when
surprised.
they tell you. Yes.
There is coming a time you're going to have to make a choice. Are you going to stand with Christ, or are you going to back off and do life? Because the tribulation in this time, when you look at tribulation, there's going to be people that's going to have to make a choice then, and it's going to be life or death. I mean, are you going to be able to, husbands, are you going to be able to sit there and watch your wife have things done to her that you can't believe? If they say this is going to continue unless you turn away from Christ. Or if you have children, things happen, they'll do things to your kids. They will try to do anything they can to make you renounce your Christianity.
And those are things that's already happened in history.
Yeah.
I mean, these are not unknown events.
There's nothing new under the sun.
No.
Satan, he likes to reuse things. And
we've just been shielded from it here in the United States of
but
America.
it's coming. And
ISIS was a great example.
But we've also had some of the shootings here in the United States in the schools where they asked some of the students,
are you a Christian?
"Are you a Christian?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they said yes,
Down
It's a
in
great point.
Paducah.
Columbine was one of those where students asked other students to recant their belief in Christ and
I
just
think
face.
the one in Paducah, it was a Bible study group
It was.
that they did. We're going to be targeted. You just have to be prepared. You have to be prepared that your next heartbeat is going to be your last, and your next breath is going to be your last.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared for that. Steve Hill, anybody knows me knows I like Steve Hill. He always said, for those people that says, I'll do it tomorrow, he goes, tomorrow is only found on a fool's calendar.
Yeah.
Bible even says, we're not promised tomorrow. How many people went to bed last night thinking, well, I'm going to do this tomorrow, go to work, do this. They never had a chance. I mean, there's been two people in my family through the years. I had an uncle, got up one night to go to the bathroom. Before he hit the floor, he was dead. My brother, he was driving himself to the hospital. Before he hit the tree, he was dead. You're going like, when it says in a twinkling of an eye, I looked up how fast a blink of an eye is. That's 1/10 of a second. That's how fast your life can be done, and that's how fast it's going to be when Jesus comes back. That's why he's given us these signs. When you look at these signs, he's telling you these signs to make you be prepared so that you won't be caught unawares. It says, and shall hate one another. You can see that during this pandemic, the hatred for the church has been quite obvious. In fact, they're saying church is not, what's that, needs to be, what was that term they used? Necessary or essential. Church is not essential. If God's not essential, what is? If Jesus isn't essential, what is? That is the only hope for this world, is Jesus Christ. Okay, offended means to entrap, to trip up, to entice to sin. And I mean, one preacher put on how last year he was at a restaurant. He said "Merry Christmas," and the waiter got real mad at him and said, "I don't like leaving nobody out." Offended over something as simple as Merry Christmas. My niece's husband was about 2 Christmases ago. He used to deliver to Speedway. He held the door open for some woman and her kid. He said, "Hope you have a Merry Christmas." She called the police on him. The police came out, talked to him, and they said, "I can't believe this." See, so offense. I think I've told you, the Bible, if you read the Bible, it's going to offend you if you've got sin in your life.
That's right.
The Bible is there to get sin out of your life. If the Bible does not offend you, if you're unsaved, something's wrong. You have a truly hard heart. Because, some people say we shouldn't preach that. No, if it's in the Bible, we need to preach it. And
Yeah, because we're literally in the age of offense.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is from verses 4 through 14. This is the preparation before the rapture takes place. This is Jesus saying, "Hey, you want to know what the world's going to look like before I come back? People are going to be offended with each other. Like you said, you can go out to the grocery store right now, and I guarantee you, I'll give you 3 things you could say, and you'll offend at least one person if they hear you long enough. Betraying each other. You have betrayal. You have betrayal in relationships. You have betrayal in workplaces. You have betrayal among family members. And then you have hate for one another. We have absolutely reached a high point of hatred for people. And most of it is driven by the political beliefs of individuals. They are literally, how many of you, and maybe I shouldn't ask this, or maybe you shouldn't answer this, but have any of you been driving around your neighborhood and you've been disappointed in your neighbor based upon the sign of their candidate sitting in the front yard that you weren't expecting?
we get one honest person.
You thought you knew somebody and you went, that's
What are you
happening
thinking?
all over the place.
Yeah.
Really, folks, that's where we have let ourselves reach that particular boil, that we are in a very sad and sobering time because people, even as families, are going to turn on each other. So,
Oh, and it'll be worse during the tribulation.
yes, it will be worse during the tribulation.
We'll probably tell
Absolutely.
that later. Verse 11, and many false prophets shall arise and shall deceive or seduce many. There are so many. Just turn on your Christian TV, and you'll see some. I'll say, I'm not going to give any names, but one of the biggest false teachings right now is what's called hyper grace. They say that holiness is the old covenant, grace is the new covenant. And they say that once you're saved, all your past sins, your present sins, and future sins are already forgiven. That's not what Paul says in Romans. What that is they're getting a little bit of Jesus, but they're keeping a whole lot for themselves. It's that little bit of Jesus that's going to make them feel good. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's one preacher I just heard said it, we serve the same God as the Muslims. Allah is God. I mean, I can go on and on. It blows my mind what people will believe. And one preacher down in Dallas about 7 years ago said, if it's not fun, it's not from God. Where's that in the Bible? Show me these things in the Bible. Yeah, we're saved by grace. It's unmerited grace. But God said, I am the Lord God. Be you holy, for I am holy. Peter says in the New Testament, without holiness, we will not see the Lord. If God said he does not change, he says, be holy because I am holy, he means it today. I mean, that's why you've got to guard your mind by reading the Bible and praying. because otherwise,
You also have to know the perspective of Satan. Satan knows what heaven is all about. He was there.
he was there for thousands of years.
He inhabited it, and he knows the purpose and the heart of God, and he knows the redemption that was bought. I believe he attempted to prevent it in every way, shape, or form with the temptation of Christ and the attempt to kill him as a child and using Herod. And he did everything he could to prevent Christ from doing what he was ultimately godly destined to do. And if we who are in tune with the world, or in tune with the Word and led by the Spirit, recognize the things that are going on, he knows what's going on.
I would
For
say
he is giving a longer leash to allow these things to happen and to cause and create chaos. So it is absolutely the opportunity of Satan that he will take advantage of raising false prophets to deceive people in believing a false doctrine right before Jesus takes his church. He does that on purpose. It's by design. So we have to be careful with seducing spirits. We have to be filled with the Spirit so we can have discernment and wisdom, because these false prophets arise with the purpose of leading people astray so that when the rapture takes place, these folks are left behind.
you've got to remember, Satan knows the Bible better than we do. Satan knows what his ending is. He wants to take as many of you with him as he possibly can. He's the beginner of those ones that bringing sorrow on other people brings you joy. He's the originator of that. He knows he's not going to go to hell. He's going to get thrown in the lake of fire, which is called the second death. He knows that, so he wants to take each and every one of you here. And he knows the men and women. He'll make them say just a little bit enough of the gospel to get you hooked. That's why you should never follow personalities. I mean, there's some people on TV, they've got great personality. They make you think that they're all holy or whatever, but if you listen to their teachings, you'll know that they're not. So Satan wants to trick you and take you to hell with him. So you've got to be prepared for that. And one of the things for false prophets, it says pretenders, imposters. We've got those. But if you try to look it up on YouTube, I would say not to, because most of the ones you'll find about being false prophets on YouTube are Pentecostals and Charismatics. And that's coming from the people that don't believe in the fivefold gifts. So, but yeah, if you listen to some, you'll know. Ephesians 4:11, he gave some to be apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. So that's what you'll find on YouTube. You can find anything on YouTube. There's people on there that think Paul was a false prophet. He writes almost half the New Testament, but yet he's a false prophet. See, that's the kind of thing you've got to watch out for. Matthew 12, and because iniquity or sin shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. And that brings to mind something that you preached last November about the Laodicean church.
Wow.
At
Oh, yeah, we did.
3:16, he said, I'd rather you be hot or cold. If you're lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out. That's when I think you went to another level, actually, is when you start preaching about the 7 churches. You went from to...
Oh, well, hey.
Yeah. But yeah, I wish you would have seen that, Barry. He wasn't paying attention. You know, it's,
He said over the past year, my preaching went from to
but yeah, it brings me to that. The love of many shall wax cold. It's like that verse, and I think it's verse Timothy. Have a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. I mean, I know it's hard. I remember when I was first saved when I was 15. I was all gung-ho and everything else. And then you get married, and you've got other responsibility. You don't have all that free time you had when you were single. You've got somebody else to think about. Then your kids come along, and you've got that. And I know it's hard to keep that, but we've got to. We need to be red hot. So what? So they hate you. That just means you're doing your job as a Christian. I'm waiting for somebody to say something like that to me so I can thank them.
We better be careful what we ask for. We say we want to be like Christ.
Yeah. How was Christ treated the last 48 hours of his life?
Because if they hated me, they're going to hate you.
Yeah.
So if you're like him, you just might as well accept that world that he
That's why he says in the verses before, there's coming a time, I'm telling you, there's coming a time you're going to have to make a choice.
Well, that also reminds me of the scripture that Paul, he said, I did not come to you with enticing words of men's wisdom, but I came in the demonstration of the power of the Holy Ghost. And that should be right there, the telltale sign of who's got the goods and who doesn't. You don't have to look far. Let me just put it this way, and I'm not trying to, don't quote me and say, oh my goodness, pastor just put down about every church. That's not what I'm doing. But you won't have to look far to find a church that has a great look. Music, preaching, ministries, they've got a good look. But how far do you have to go to find a demonstration of the Spirit where it doesn't matter what the look is?
Trust me on that one. I searched
you know,
years.
But I convict myself in that because there's days I struggle to pray a headache out of my own head.
Yeah.
I at least take some solace in knowing that I'm convicted by these scriptures to realize that we are still not even showing the demonstration. And to kind of, I may be jumping a little bit, but if you look at these verses that we just read, verse 9, 10, 11, 12, that's an outline of all the things the devil is doing right now with a purpose. He is purposely delivering you up in affliction. He's deliberately afflicting people with sickness, illnesses, disease, cancer, everything. It's on purpose. He's deliberately trying to kill you. He's deliberately trying to make you hated of all the world. He's deliberately trying to make people offended at each other. He's deliberately making people betray each other and hate each other. He's deliberately rising up false prophets. He's deliberately deceiving people. He's deliberately making sin, lawlessness, and iniquity abound so that people won't love each other. He's doing that on purpose because of verses 13 and 14. I'm getting kind of ahead, but the devil is doing this on purpose for the intent and purpose of he knows that those that endure to the end are the ones who get saved.
That's right.
And if he can prevent you from enduring and get you to give up and quit, then you won't be saved. So he will throw everything he can at as many people as he can, because when he knows Jesus comes and gets his church, he doesn't have the ability to touch his church anymore. So that culminates with a verse 14 as to why he's doing what he's doing.
Another thing is he'll do it through fear too. I think I heard
Emotion,
you
yes.
telling somebody Sunday about people in your neighborhood said if Trump wins, they're going to riot. Try to put that fear
Well, they have been already. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. I mean,
Well, I mean, tiny little Fairborn.
oh, fair.
Yeah. But, yeah. But, you know, hey, go ahead. I'm going to vote for the one that's got the most biblical values. I know you're not supposed to say that in church, but I'm not the pastor. So I'll say it, and he can rebuke me later.
Well, I will say I will never stand for a candidate. You know, my personal beliefs is I have grown weary of voting for the lesser of two evils, because evil is evil.
Yes.
And it is something that has really ravaged my heart the older that I get. But to bring it back to this, I want I want you to know that
My fault.
all these problems are twofold. The devil is causing it, but God is allowing it. And the reason that things are getting worse is because the devil is fighting harder because time is almost over. And the reason he's fighting harder today, this is the reason we're dealing with COVID. This is the reason we're dealing with astronomical amounts of cancer. This is why we're dealing with earthquakes at levels never seen before, powers that we've never seen before. This is why we're seeing hurricanes and typhoons. This is why we are seeing 18 conflicts that the United States is just involved with, in 64 countries warring with each other, 576 entities and militias and special interest groups that are shooting bullets at each other. The reason we are seeing all this is because verse 14.
Yes.
That this gospel be preached to the world and all nations. The devil is pulling out all the stops to prevent the gospel from reaching all four corners. You see, technology has advanced to such a high degree that we are now able to reach areas and places on the earth never before reached. And let me share something with you on one of the ways that is happening. You know, every year, the millions of boxes that Operation Christmas Child delivers to the world. The goal and the intent is to give these boxes of goodies to kids across the globe. But in reality, they're sharing the gospel to the youngest and the most impressionable minds. And when they're sharing it with the kids are going and sharing this gospel to their parents who have never heard of this before. And they're converting people. Literally, there are stories of villages in unknown places in the continent of Africa and Asia and in South America where they are literally jumping on boats and rowing boats to villages to give these boxes from Operation Christmas Child. And they have translated the gospel story about Jesus in their native tongue. And I'm telling you, if you're the devil and you're trying to prevent it, how are you going to prevent it? You're going to inflict people. You're going to bring all types of chaos. You're going to do everything you can to prevent that gospel from getting out. But it just so happens that the devil himself is fulfilling the plan of God.
That's right.
Because when this gospel gets out, then the end will come.
Another word for that is the finale.
The finale. I love it.
Just what he was touching on, Daniel Kalinda, he preaches in Africa. He took over for Reinhard Bonnke. He said he went into this one village, and he went into the classroom. They let him in the classroom, and they were giving the gospel to him. And they noticed a bunch of adults sitting out under a tree, and he goes, "Who are they?" And he goes, "Well, those are the parents." He said, "All right." They went out and started talking to the parents, and 31 of them were converted to Christianity. See, the gospel has power. Jesus' words have power. And it can break down anything. It can break down any disease. It can break down depression. It can break down strongholds. That's why Jesus said this has to go to the whole world. And another thing, when there was something in Egypt, it was probably about 10 years ago, some imam heard that something was happening. And so he put it on Twitter and Facebook. Within 1 hour, 5,000 people showed up in this square to protest. That's how fast word can get around. 1 hour, 50,000 people showed up that an hour before they didn't know. That's the power of that.
You know, it makes you think or feel that verse 14 gives us a picture that God's just waiting to cover the last pieces of the globe. And the moment he's covered every aspect.
I think I just read the other day, it was translated into the 726th language.
Wow. 726 languages the gospel has been translated.
I don't know how many more there is, but 726 the Bible has been translated into. So that tells you right there, the gospel is going around the globe. Almost everyone has heard of it. And that's one of the signs. And it's in Paul's gospel somewhere. He says, comfort each other with these words. You should be excited.
You should be excited.
I am excited. I'm going to go to heaven. The cheapest material they got's gold, and I'm going to walk on it.
That's right.
And I'm not going to feel no pain. He's going to have perfect eyesight to see Jesus. There's going to be no night, no pain, no sorrow. There's just going to be happiness.
So I think we will conclude this portion. I knew that's exactly what would happen. That these verses 4 through 14, this is a picture of what Jesus said the condition of the world would look like right before he raptures or carries away the church. So in summation of this portion, here are the things that need to take place before the church is raptured. Okay? There needs to be false Christs and prophets rise up. There need to be wars. There need to be rumors of wars. There need to be famines. There need to be earthquakes. There's got to be a tribulation or a distress or pressure put on the believer. There has to be a great apostasy. There has to be a falling away of the believers. There has to be a deception to those who believe what Christianity is. There has to be a betrayal of the church, or betrayal of people. There has to be false prophets, false preachers, false teachers. There has to be an increase of sin in the world. The world has to become more unloving than it ever has been before. That there has to be Christians that are struggling to just preserve their salvation. And there has to be a preaching of the gospel to every nook and cranny on this globe. I have one question for you. What is there left to happen? I see Luana Wallace just posted. She goes, sounds to me like we're here or we're there. It does, doesn't it?
Yes.
Jesus's specific descriptions of what the world will look like in preparation of the taking of his church has never been more real than it has been at this very moment. And he tells us this is just the signs of the beginning. I don't know how much worse it will get, but I do believe there will be the escape and the removal of the church before the great tribulation takes place and the rise of the Antichrist. That's where we'll end this week, and we'll pick that up next week, because beginning at verse 15, we are going to talk about the abomination of desolation as spoken by Daniel. Because now Jesus, in verses 4 through 14, he spoke of a world situation that can be interpreted to be seen from the world's perspective and from the church perspective. But beginning at verse 15, he is speaking directly right at the face of the Jewish believer. Right at them. It will directly, without any question, beginning at verse 15, it deals directly with the nation of Israel, the establishment of Jerusalem, the rise of the Antichrist, and what the Great Tribulation. So, if you want to know more or hear more, tune in next Wednesday, and we were going to cover the time period of the Great Tribulation and try to also get into the second coming of Christ. And hopefully we'll be able to wrap it up and then talk about the signs of the coming of Christ as we see it inside the church, not just from a world perspective, but we as believers, what we are going to see happening in our doors, in our churches, from our pulpits and our pews and our Sunday school classrooms. And it's some pretty sobering and somewhat concerning things. So are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions from Matthew 24, verses 1 through 14? None? Okay. I appreciate each and every one of you coming out. We hope that this encourages you, because let me leave this with you. This should not scare you. This will be a natural reaction to go, oh my goodness, what am I going to have to go through? What am I going to have to endure? How is this going to affect me? How is this going to affect my home, my family, my kids? Those are natural reactions. Those are the fleshly reactions. God has implored us, Christ has implored us, the Holy Spirit is imploring us to, as you see these things, be encouraged. Your redemption is drawing nigh. As we as the church, as we see these days get closer and become more of a reality, it should excite us in the depths of our soul of his return. So, any questions? Any other comments? Anything else? All right. So next Wednesday we'll pick up and we'll cover the Great Tribulation time period as Christ spoke about. Sim, I appreciate it. Another great time. So we look forward to seeing each and every one of you then. So God bless. You all have a great night. We'll see you on Sunday. Be ready for church.